We're going to talk about what really matters, experiences versus memories. And if you look at the progression of economic society, the foundation of it is neoclassic economics. It's the division of work, it's labor, it's production systems, and that was a real boost for economies in the early part of the prior century. And then we moved into the era of total quality management, quality circles, Six Sigma, Lean, and all those concepts. And those have also helped create another boost to productivity. Now, if you take a look at the economy and productivity, and there's a recent article just a few days ago in the Wall Street Journal, it's kind of flattened out. And we've studied organizations that have hit that next S-curve of improvement of productivity, and they've really mastered behavioral economics. How many of you are familiar with behavioral economics? Oh, that's wonderful. So it's probably about half of you. Gallup Sciences, rather qualitative and quantitative research, is grounded in behavioral economics. So we're going to use that as a foundation for kind of what we talked through here. In the words of Jim, we met early this morning, behavioral economics, not the theoretical, the MIT or the Princeton, but the applied definition, it's how mathematics describes the human nature and how it plays out. So I've got a series of images I'm going to give you kind of the crash course in behavioral economics. I've done this exercise all around the world from groups in Sao Paulo as large as 3,000, as small as 4 CEOs in a small room here at Gallup, and everywhere in between, probably about over 400 of these. So you're going to be my experiment group. Do I need to go to the IRB or anything? You all decide as consent. Are you okay with this? All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a series of images, and I'd like you to just recognize what it is and verbally shout out what you see on the screen. I'll be timing you, so I'll be comparing you against my baseline of about 400 organizations that I've done this with. And let's go ahead with the first one. Move. Come on, you're supposed to. 1 second, 2 seconds, maybe a little bit faster if you can recognize. Next one. Shot. All right. Next one. Oh, he's been married. Yeah, how'd you like? All right, let's take a look at this next slide. See the number of F's you can count here. I'm going to time you. The number of F's. And we're going. We're at 5 seconds. 4 here. 5 here. We're going to cut it off in about 3 seconds. 6. Let's try again. How many? What do you get? How many? 8. 8 is the right number. And then here's the last slide I'm going to give you. Who can get this without using your mobile device? Shout it out if you have it. I'm counting on. Ooh, 328, 328, 328. No. Go here, another, 328, 328. What is it? 408. Wow, congratulations. Have you seen this before? And your name is... Can we see you later? We like to get a little bit of your DNA and study it. That's really wonderful. Usually it takes, I've done this quite a bit, it takes a group of about 50 to get a ratio of 1 person that can crack the 17 times 24 code. So why are we kind of go through the facial recognitions and counting F's and trying to understand what the equation output is? Well, if you take a look at the way the brain works, and this is a construct that was developed by first Dr. Kahneman, and it's the foundation for behavioral economics. You have inputs that come in the form of stimulus and information that we take in. And the work around behavioral economics suggests that you essentially have 2 parts of thinking. You have thinking fast and slow, system 1 and system 2. I'm going to give you a definition in a moment. And then you've got the back end of that, which is a behavioral response, a thought, a feeling, some reaction to it. So we take a look at system 1 and system 2. System 1 is thinking fast. The faces, was that system 1 or system 2, you think? Right. Now, we could get bogged down. I could tell you it's the frontal part of the lobe that's most influential in facial recognition. We could go through the entire physiology of the body and the brain, and then we all get tripped up. And then no matter if you're from Princeton or MIT, you're getting disagreements as to which parts of the brain have more influence. And that's where Kahneman was really quite brilliant, just to simplify it, to say, you've got two parts of the brain, system 1 and system 2. And system 2 requires critical thought, thinking, analytics, requires a lot more mental energy. So we take a look at the 17 times 24. Would that be more system 1 or system 2? System 2. So why is that important? Well, when we study consumer behavior, we find, as an aggregate from over 36,000 businesses that we've worked with, about 70% of decisions are thinking fast decisions. They're things that are non-rational, in many cases emotionally based, whereas about 30% are bounded into rational. Now, this plays out differently for different types of organizations that we work with and we study. You can't explicitly and completely say that non-ration is the formula for every business. I worked with a retailer. They have about 18,000 units around the U.S., and their rational bounding is much greater. We studied them, and we found the difference between key success factors or drivers of decisions was about a half-mile distance. If you had to choose between them and the competitor, about a half-mile distance was a key factor. And then other things laddered as kind of secondary and third-tier drivers. When we take a look at an aggregate of all decisions consumers make, they do lean towards more the non-rational decision-making process. And how do we know that? Well, it's both from the work that, has anyone read this book, Thinking Fast and Slow? Thinking Fast and Slow? I remember when I first got to Gallup and Jim Clifton, our CEO, gave this to me. And he said, I got a book I want you to read, and come back to me with some of your thoughts and ideas. And I said, how thick that thing is? I was avoiding him in his office for about a month until I got through this thing. But how many of you, Chris, you're laughing, you know it's true. How many of you, part of the value that you deliver to your clients, your organizations, is finding out why people or what decisions they're going to make? Just raise your hands. I tell you what, if that's part of your role, then you really need to have a profound understanding of behavioral economics, because that's the foundation for the work that you do. So we partnered with the University of Tokyo, and we put, not theoretical scenarios, but consumers as they were getting ready to make a decision under MRI. So this is an older version of the Siemens MRI. And we looked at the part of the brain that lit up the most. And it was a part of the brain that we often hear about, size of almond or my thumb, the amygdala. And the correlation coefficient, the R factor up there, what's the number if you can see it? 0.7, 89, rounded off, 79% of the variation in the decision making and the neural mapping was found within the amygdala. So this amygdala is like a really important thing for us to understand as qualitative researchers, how it reacts and what it influences. When we take a look at the amygdala, there's a lot of different factors that it influences, but one of the most significant things is memories, both short and long-term memories. So once we understand what triggers the amygdala, then we can better predict the memories that are created that tie to those decisions, those neurological mappings. Now, neurological mappings are incredibly important. After day 42 of conception, everyone know what that is? Conception? Yeah? Follow me? You have one neuron. Now, after age 3, they used to think it was 100 billion neurons. The latest research suggests about 86 billion neurons are formed during that period of time, and about 15,000 per synapsis. And the synapsis connects the neurons, which connects the parts of the brain together, which influences everything that we do or we don't do. By the age of 16, about half of those synapses are gone. And a lot of who you are and how you see the world in mental prison is already formed. Now, there's neuroplasticity that can occur to a great extent up to age of 24, and beyond that becomes a little bit harder as we all get somewhat older in age. But those mappings are really incredibly important to understand how they're made, how they can be remade or reconnected, in particular through memories. So here's an example from Kahneman's research. You see two patient study groups. You see patient study group A and B. And on the vertical, the y-axis, and that's what I love you as researchers, we all can read these graphs. you see the pain threshold reported by the patients going through a colonoscopy. And then on the horizontal axis, x-axis, you see the amount of time. Now, is the pain threshold the same, greater, or less between A and B? Is A higher or equal to B? Higher than B or less than B? The peaks. What do you say? About the same. It's about the same on the chart. If you're in the back, it's a little hard to read, but it's a peak a little bit over 8. How about duration of time? Patient A has about how many minutes? Yeah, about like 8 minutes, right? And then patient B, how many minutes? About 19, almost 20 minutes. So the pain thresholds are the same, yet the duration of time is double for patient group on the right, patient group B. Which one would say they had a better memory? Who would want to repeat it again? The data shows that patient group A had the worst memory and the highest degree of resistance to that procedure again. Why? And it's counterintuitive because really, if you look at it, it's quicker, same amount of pain. It's because the experience of 19 minutes didn't matter. It's the last memory that was encoded during that experience. I heard it best said by one individual. He said, I went to this opera, it was 90 minutes in duration, it was flawless, beautiful for 89 minutes. The last minute, the notes were off, it was ruined. The experience wasn't ruined. He had 89 minutes of brilliance, but he had 1 minute that ruined the entire memory of the experience. So memories really matter. If you're going to go book Christine here works in Marriott, I used to work there too. If you're going to book a hotel, vacation experience, and it can be anything you want. So anyone remember Fantasy Island? I'm 48, so I was in a year. Fantasy Island, what could Mr. Rourke give you? Anything? Anything you wanted? So if you could have a Fantasy Island, you still have to pay for an experience. But the trade-off was you could have no memory of it. Would you still buy it? No way to anticipate the memory that you're going to consume. No way to dial up the memory again and again, and so on and so forth. So memories are really incredibly important in the research that we do. So we kind of see our work here at Gallup as Morpheus in the Matrix, because we've got this red pill and this blue pill. And the blue pill is this kind of cognitive ease. It's this system 1 thinking, and we have to get to a system 2 level to really identify what memories are going to be engineered to matter most, influence decisions. One of the tools that we use is ethnographic research. Now, our ethnographic research, and I'll dial some points on this. I've trained at Gallup, hundreds of Gallup staff. I've trained with graduate students, hundreds of graduate students. I've trained hundreds and hundreds of our clients to do this work. One of the things we do with our clients is we co-creation research. We involve them in the data collection. That's good for a couple of reasons. Not just because it gives us operational context to their business, but because we always ask our clients to select the new up-and-coming leaders. So we're actually developing the new leaders and grounding them in this research methodology and the benefits. And by the way, the disclaimer is ethnography is not the one-fix-all tool. The research brief should always shape the research methodologies, whether that's quant, qual, mix, what comes first, what comes last. So that's our approach at Gallup. But when ethnographic research is appropriate, we bring along and collect the data. Also, the brilliance of this is change management. It's one thing for a Gallup PhD to stand up and say, these are the insights. It's much more powerful when you have a 30-something up-and-coming manager stand up and say, yeah, I heard that too. And they've internalized it, they saw it, and they're actually part of the change management that we roll out. Another thing we've learned about doing deep insight collection, about identifying memories, is that you have to have a very special DNA for this. This is not a matter of your IQ score. This is identifying individuals that have both a good mix of analytical and creative synapses in their brains. If I take somebody and they're just analytical, they're going to give me a construct of a descriptive for what happens. It'll categorize, it'll give me cycle times and duration, and and objects, but they won't give me a inference of why is that happening, what's underpinning the behaviors that you're seeing. And then more importantly, what is the recommendation? That's the creativity side of designing a new memory. On the flip side, if I take somebody that's high ideation and creative and they don't have the analytical side, they just give me a boatload of ideas that don't tie to any real deep data that underpins it all. So it's really mixed. I tend to find that about 1 in 10 researchers, qualitative researchers, have a natural ability to do this, to bring back the golden nuggets. And actually, we've done research at Gallup to identify the themes that are most predictive of someone having both the chasm and cross of analytical and creative that we bring in this type of research in an organization. So how do we do it? Well, this is a simplified, since we've only got 30 minutes and I have to give my partner her fair amount of time. This is a very simple matrix that we use. We try to take a look at, through the eyes of the customer, their experience. And a couple things that we do this. One, we always tag up qualitative ethnographic researchers that have no understanding of the business. One of the greatest consultants of our past years was Peter Drucker. When they asked Peter, what made you such a great consultant? He said, I go into businesses I know nothing about, and I ask all the very simple, basic questions. And so we actually look for people on a research team that have no biases towards the data that we're collecting. The other thing that we do is when the clients love to do this, they come to you and say, go in and study the consumer, whether it's B2b or B2C. Here's our standards, here's our training, here's our operating procedures. We'll take them, but we don't look at them before we go in. Because again, we want to try to, you can never minimize or zero out bias, but we want to guard against it as much as possible, especially unintentional bias. We'll do the research, and then we'll come back and we'll take things like your brand standards or your training procedures, and we'll overlay those on the insights that we're collecting. But we really try to send them in. And what we don't do, we do particularly consumer research, this is really hard when we train other companies to do this. When I just got done training 250 general managers for a luxury brand. Sorry, not yours, it was another one. And we trained 250 general managers to do ethnography. Now, we had the ratios of some come back with golden nuggets and some don't. Everyone had 2 days of training. I'm giving you kind of the 15-minute bridge version of this. They came back, and we told them on the front end, we will only reward general managers first if they only come back with observations and insights around the customer. We told them over and over again, told them 15 times through the 2 days of training, do not look at the employees. The employees are just part of the environment. If the customer doesn't notice them, then it's really not important for us. Don't look at the menus. Don't tell us about the aesthetics of the environment. Only if the customer takes notice of it or doesn't take notice of it. That's the type of observation we want. Out of 250, there was only 4 general managers that came back and did it right. Their gravitation was, let me tell you about the employees and what they were doing. Or let me tell you about the physical environment. No, that doesn't matter. It's the memories that are being reported with the customer that matter most. So a couple things. We've got a very structured set of criteria around how to detect or how to infer when a memory is being recorded. I'm just giving you 3 that are typically most common and powerful. The first one is moment of truth. In your data that you've seen, have you ever run across the phenomena that we have at Gallup, where a customer has had a problem, a moment of truth, and the problem has been resolved to exceed their expectations, and then you look at their behaviors, and they're actually more loyal than when a problem ever happened? Has that ever, you've seen it in your data? We've seen it in ours. In fact, we've had some clients say, should we engineer problems so we drive higher down? That's how, we don't want to do that, right? We want to engineer the right memories, lower costs, great efficiencies, lower friction. The reason is because if you look back to the brief description of the amygdala gets activated by surprises. So now essentially you have 1 lane of memory, someone going about their experience, and now goes into 4 and 6 lanes of memory with that experience. You've got this snowplow going on the road. And then you're overlaying a positive memory on top of it. That's why it's so powerful. It's that memory that you're creating from a bad event. The other one is first impressions. Remember what Mom would always say when you're getting ready, your dad for a date or whatever, first impressions really matter? This is often missed even by the best brands that we work with. They take care of the loyal customers, the plats, the golds, the silvers, the diamonds, whatever nomenclature the loyalty program is, but they miss the opportunity for the very first memory loading. Because what we found in our research, that is the lens by which the consumer overlays and evaluates all other experiences that transform into memories and what drives decisions. I remember personally flying when I was a young manager. They'd kick me in the back and coach because I didn't have status in the company. And I have to go across the pond on an 8 to 14-hour flight. And I flew with this airline. I won't tell you the airline name, but now I'm their global services. So if I'm not making my connections, I get a car that pulls up to the plane, and I get to go in the dining rooms and airports with linens and all that good stuff. But I still don't have a high emotional affinity to them because the first flight, I was in the back, and the jailers, the stewardesses, they threw peanuts at me. And I tell you what, the first memory I have of Virgin was I was flying coach, and they gave me a little bag, and I remember the bag, and I got a toothbrush, and I thought only people in business class got the toothbrush. Man, that amygdala was just really excited at that point. And that explains that affinity to it. So those first-time customers are tremendously important, tremendously important. We get our information technologies and systems aren't properly equipped to identify them. And then the other thing I'm going to leave you with, before I hand it over to my colleague, Elena, is this thing around reciprocal effects. Has anyone heard of reciprocal effects? I'm not going to quiz you, that's good. So they used to think that if you give a little bit better service, like I smile a little bit more, the experience is a little bit better, maybe the memory gets loaded a little bit deeper, and then if I'm a little bit better and a little bit nicer in my customer service delivery, I get a little bit linear increase in that, and the equation is very linear, X, Y. And this really started with some research that was done by Cornell. What we find is that you really don't get a memory loaded, a strong one, unless there's a reciprocal effect. It's a J curve that takes off. So here's the problem. And I do a lot of work with redesigning service delivery. Employees tend to think that they're delivering good service. They tend to only really embed a memory if they get that J curve, that reciprocal approach. And I'll give you one brief example before I hand it over. We had a facility, this was in Shanghai. They said we can't deliver great loyalty like other facilities because Chinese travelers don't give fives, or if you use NPS, the top of NPS. This was a Likert scale 5. And so at Gallup we do what we do. Big data, the quants. We bridge between the bias factors of Chinese and other travelers. And we can do that through statistical modeling. We said we'd be biased, and we bridge the bias factor, you're still below performance levels. Then they gave us the excuse of, well, it's because we got more business travelers and we bridge that. It's all statistical bridging. We said, no, we're still below. So I get a plane, I fly into Shanghai. I'm in the lobby doing ethnography, and I see a lady coming up to the front area getting help, and I see a biofeedback, a positivity, smile, eye contact, eye dilation, all these things we're looking for. I do a quick intercept, tell me how you feel about, oh, it's great, I love you, it's wonderful. So that's a positive reinforcing reciprocal effect. And then I interviewed the next gentleman. He seemed to have a great experience. Nothing bad happened. And I said, tell me how you felt about it. He said, I was really treated badly. In fact, he said, I was discriminated against. And when I asked him why, during the intercept, he said, because the lady in front of me got great service, but the person, being me, coming up to this area to be serviced, I just got very clinical service. And when we did the research with the staff, they thought that the Chinese local regional travelers preferred a very rigid, much more clinical type of non-emotional service. What was happening is, and this was really brilliant, the gentleman said to us in the interview, which played out to the other data we collected, he said, I'm not going to smile externally. Culturally, I'm not going to do that. But I still want what she got, I'm just going to be smiling inside. You don't get that kind of brilliant research through a survey. You send it via email. It only comes to these really deep insights. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my counterpart, Alana.
Thanks so much, John. So I have the enviable enviable or unenviable task of linking, I think, two discrete concepts together, both raised by my incredible Gallup colleagues, John Timmerman and Jim Clifton. So I think John really walked us through the behavioral economics and the psychology of why memories are so integral to customer experiences and why memory trumps experience when you're looking at engagement and loyalty. And then Jim this morning, I think, offered, a provocative answer to Rick's great question about what do you see as the biggest opportunity for qualitative research in the future? And Jim said he saw the growth of qualitative research in the business-to-business consumer space as really the biggest growth opportunity, potentially trumping the utility of quantitative metrics in that arena at all. So I want to offer a couple thoughts about why I think Jim made that claim, and really asking the question, are B2B customers really that different? And does all the great work that we're hearing about today in the business-to-consumer space apply to business-to-business? So a little bit about what we know about the B2B customer journey. Gallup is increasingly working with B2B clients, some of whom are here today, thank you. And we have a nice database of close to 300 B2B customers, as well as a lot of accompanying qualitative data from these customers. And what are we seeing from them? Well, we're seeing that unlocking growth and growing organically, not through acquisitions, is very, very difficult, and it's more difficult than in the business-to-consumer space. And these success factors of what makes one B2B relationship so much better than another narrowly hinges on this sort of ephemeral and ambiguous and difficult to explain, but I'll try to, quality of the client relationship between that B2B customer. In that pursuit of building lasting partnerships, you see a lot of efforts on process, on price, on product positioning, and we see that not really being a differentiator. And as John, I think, so richly and brilliantly pointed out, the memory of past experiences really clouds today's perception, and system one kicks in. But think about how much more complicated that is in the B2B setting, because it's not one consumer, it's not one decision maker, it's not one individual. Arguably, I learned a lot about semiotics. It's clearly no individuals act in isolation, but in a B2B setting, it's organizational level decision making. That adds a layer of complexity in relationships and decisions that just doesn't exist in the business to consumer space. So looking at that kind of rich database that we have and the experiences that we've had, we see that fewer than 1 in 7, or about 1 in 7 B2B customers really have optimal relationships with their clients. Again, that's lower than in the business to consumer side. And about 71% using our emotional engagement metric, which we heard, I think a similar concept from Marriott about that difference between the true engagement, the raving fans, and that differing level of indifference down to negativity. It's a relatively low number that's in that raving fan, true engagement, emotionally attached space, and that's a risky place to be. So we see some tendencies of business-to-business companies that are different, I would say, than in the business-to-consumer space. We see a lot of comfort when there are long-term contracts in place, because the length of time of a contract in the B2B side is much longer than in the business-to-consumer side typically. And I think Jim talked a lot this morning about when you have an easy measurement system in place on the B2B side, when you don't have differentiating questions, when you rely heavily on quantitative metrics to the exclusion of getting at the heart of the story, you really miss that nuance and that ambiguity that tells the difference between an optimal relationship and a non-optimal relationship. And I think that companies don't understand how difficult it is to overcome past negative memories. And we see this all the time in our data collection, ethnographically or through in-depth interviews, that you can hear explanations of how a relationship has changed, but if the initial impression was negative 2 to 3 years ago, the whole relationship can be clouded. And then in a B2B sense, when you have tons of entry points into the relationship and different influencers and different decision makers, that web becomes more and more complex and more complicated. So I think we see in the best B2B relationships some attributes that are consistent that we have primarily derived qualitatively. It's that sort of seamless transition from vendor to trusted advisor that happens differently for different companies, that looks and feels differently. But a common link is that that distinction and that evolution can really only be derived qualitatively. There's transparency, there's mutual accountability. And I think what's really very important is there can be a turn in this relationship where there's a feeling that both the rational and the emotional costs of replacing the B2B supplier is too high and there's too much on the line to lose. The partnership is too integrated and requires long-lasting inputs from both sides to be replaced. And I think that that's sort of the sweet spot. But again, these are very complex topics with multiple decision makers, very difficult to understand those quantitatively. So I just wanted to leave a few parting thoughts of what we've learned in this qualitative journey on the B2B side. It's still, of course, a work in progress, but I think there's some interesting lessons that we've learned. As we talked about those non-rational elements of the B2B customer journey are best described and defined and observed qualitatively, and there's a range of different methods in which to do that. I think that not only are you missing a piece of the puzzle if you only look at this relationship quantitatively, you're often overinflating the stability of the relationship, and when you rely on sort of easy, non-differentiating metrics, things can look quite rosy, knowing that most B2B relationships are not as deep and impactful as they should be, and most of them are quite risky. Another thing that's interesting on the B2B side, and I think also for all qualitative methods, but the sample size in B2B work can typically be smaller than on the business to consumer side, but not always. I was struck when I was watching some of the videos today on the global affluent tribe side. I don't know if you all agree. I felt like there was one person who really stood out. Chris, my colleague, said that too. There was just one respondent or one participant that we loved. And everything that he had to say triggered more thinking and more insights for me than everyone else combined. And that's kind of life. And sometimes what you see on the B2B side in particular is it's not a question of what do the majority of people think in an organization. I mean, that's important. You can't sort of overinflate the importance of one person versus 300 other people. But just like in life, the most meaningful observations don't always come from the majority. They could come from one particularly futuristic or insightful customer. And I think that that can be a difficult balance to bring in an organization that is geared towards looking at things quantitatively when what they really care the most about are what the majority opinions are. We've talked a lot about this today, so I won't go too much into it, but the qualitative responses on the B2B side don't always align with the quantitative scores. They typically skew more negatively. It's very rare that you see the other way around. And I think there's two reasons for that. One is questions that are being asked might not be very good or very differentiating. And I think that customers have sometimes a guilt feeling, particularly in in-person interviewing, because they know that most organizations rely on quantitative scores for performance and for incentives. So, they'll give you a 4. They really want to give you a 2. You just know it. Everything else they said in the interview shows that. And they're going back and forth in their numerical scores. And sometimes they even admit that they feel a little guilty about it. So I think you see that. And what I like about the qualitative data on the B2B side in particular is I think there's less of a sense that their answers are going to be used for performance or incentives of people that they've come to know, because we see a lot of loyalty to account team members, even if there are concerns about an organizational relationship overall. And I think that that can be a reason why you see that disconnect sometimes. I think that we're a little bit over time, and I don't want to stop you from the break, but one thing I wanted to end on, and I think John pointed this out about, this talent and the strength profile of the best qualitative researchers. I think in B2B research in general, because of the complexity and the multi-dimensional organizational side, this is not an area that, at least I think, will ever be digitized. I think the prospects for that are very low. And I think what you see is that the skill of the interviewer, the skill of the researcher, their ability to derive insights, inherently is the most important skill in the data collection and the insights process. Much more important than the interview guide, much more important than how the ethnography logistically is structured. And I think that the issue is that B2B companies are large. And to do a holistic customer account review requires a lot of people. So when Jim said that this is a tremendous opportunity, I think it's a tremendous opportunity for highly, highly, highly skilled researchers who can scale to the size and the complexity of most global B2B customers. So I would say I agree with him that this is, I think, an area in qualitative consumer research that will have a growing importance.